It is Friday, ladies and gentlemen, the syndicated radio transmission. I am your host, Alex Jones, waging war on corruption, crashing to the lies and disinformation. Every Friday, Bob Chapman normally joins us in the third hour. He's in the second hour today because Ventura's coming on with us in the next hour. We're going to cover a host of issues. We are simulcasting the radio show in living color and multimedia at prisonplanet.tv. Bob Chapman, of course, worked in Army intelligence. He then became one of the biggest private silver and gold brokers in the country, lived in South Africa, France, Germany, you name it. He then had the biggest newsletter up until the 1990s. He retired for a while and came back with the International Forecaster, and he joins us for the next 51 minutes. Bob, good to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. Very nice to be back again this week, and lots to talk about, as we well know.
I want to get into the economy with you. I want to get into all these hundreds of new taxes on food, on salt, on sugar, on fattening foods. I want to get into where you see the banks going with all this, the immigration reform, which means a national ID card to work for the American people, but the illegals are basically all legalized and given this system. I want to get into a host of issues, but I want to ask you, Bob, what's most important on your radar right now?
Well, I think we're seeing very desperate moves by the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve because of the ongoing, almost every week now, auctions of U.S. Treasuries as well as agency securities, the agency securities being Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, and FHA. And last year, 80% of that paper was bought by the Federal Reserve, which creates money out of thin air. But that said, this week they had a 10-year auction, a bill auction, which is shorter-term paper under a year. And they also are having a 30-year auction this week. And every time those auctions come up, the Fed and the Treasury go into the market and they try to knock gold and silver down, and they also attack the shares as well. And it's becoming so obvious that even mainline writers are starting to talk about it, and analysts and economists, the activity of the Fed and the Treasury in the markets. And so I think that's very important, because if they weren't in there, the situation would be totally different. We also are seeing the same thing in the stock market. As it levitates again in the high 10,000s, if they weren't in there, the market would be lower. We've had a lot of business news this week pertaining to the giveaway or lending of money, tax-free money, to Wall Street and banking, and the bankruptcy of Lehman, which turns out that the former president of Lehman Brothers was lying, of course, and he says he wasn't, but he was lying. And at the same time, we know now that in order to take over Lehman, J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs cut off their lines of credit and started to run on the company.
And that's actually what you said several months before that even began here on air, a couple of years ago, that this was a staged event, and now it's in major newspapers. I covered it last hour. The Mail, the Associated Press are reporting that even federal regulators put out a 2,200-page report saying that they lied and engaged in fraud, but the Federal Reserve allowed them to do this. But I guess that was the payoff, because Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan were going to absorb or feed this company into their mouth, Lehman Brothers, so they allowed their executives to get away with some cash.
Exactly. And that's a good summation. And we haven't seen the end of that, nor have we seen the end of the hijinks that are going on. And that's why it's so important that in this pending bill in the Senate, that H.R. 1207, which was passed in the House, which is part of that bill now, is not stripped out, because we've got to show the public what the Federal Reserve has been doing all these years, and we have to do away with it. We can call it the Federal Reserve, but it will belong to the U.S. Treasury and be staffed by Treasury people that are answerable The people at the Fed are not answerable to anything. And we got to stop the revolving door between Wall Street and banking and Washington. There's qualified people all over the country who can fill the shoes of those people in the Treasury Department, et cetera.
Bob,
they don't have a monopoly on brain power.
2 years ago, right around this time, a few months before the banker bailout, the controlled financial terrorism they engaged in to get Congress to go along with giving them even more power, we began to see more PR about how great the Federal Reserve was, how they're going to save us, how they love us. Now the Federal Reserve admits they've recruited tens of thousands of executives and professors to go out and propagandize to Rotary clubs, city councils, community organizations. We see stories like this one today out of the Wall Street Journal. Economists credit Fed for alleviating crisis when on record they're the ones that engineered it. And so the Feds, through this crisis, are now calling for more power, the Federal Reserve, instead of getting in trouble as they should. So this is really a big battle. And on top of that, we see Strauss-Kahn, the head of the IMF, saying, look, we can't pass Copenhagen, so we're going to do what Gordon Brown said at the G20. We are going to just go ahead and levy taxes through the executive at the wellhead on oil and on other energy systems and pay it to the IMF and World Bank, who will then not even say where the money went. I mean, this is really getting transparent.
Yeah, it's a total arrogance. They just don't care. We're going to do what we want to do because we run the world, and you don't. And how you stop them is you get rid of most of the people in Congress in November, and then we can go after all these things. There's a whole litany of things in which I don't have to repeat, you know, and so doesn't the audience. It's so key for us to kick all those people out. Very, very important. But the things that Wall Street are doing and banking is doing, along with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department, they're not going to get away with it. They're not.
Well, my point is, Bob,
markets themselves.
My point is, Bob, as you and Ron Paul and myself and many others have said in the last decade, when the bankers bring us to this global crisis, which in all their documents they say they plan to do, we're now here, to then scare the world into accepting a bank of the world, a world government, a world constitution, run by the banks, now being openly proposed by all the global leaders, Ban Ki-moon, Herman von Rompuy, Gordon Brown, Al Gore, Barack Obama, all of them, that it's an info war. Everybody out there, if they can just wake up one person to the fractional reserve banking fraud and identify these criminals, then they're not going to be able to get away with this. Just like the global warming hoax in all the polls is completely imploding, or the flu hoax completely imploded. It is a life and death situation economically to expose these people.
Never, ever been more right. And, you know, the other night I was on WVON in Chicago, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, black radio station in America. And questions came in, and I was absolutely floored at the knowledge that these callers had. And three of the women who called in all wanted to discuss the Illuminati. Now, I wouldn't have ever thought in my wildest dreams that the penetration of the things that we've been doing have reached that level. The world is waking up. I hope we have enough time to wake up enough people and we do the right things to stop these people at the pass.
Bob, I want to get back into the economy when we come back, and then a host of other issues, health care, taxes, immigration reform, i.e. total open borders, North American Union. That's what this bill does, and why they want a worker ID card for all citizens, but then the illegals are selectively left alone. But separately, we're seeing massive, coordinated, intensifying demonization of 9/11 truth. They're scared of the 1,100 architects and engineers going public, saying it's an inside job. They're scared of the poll numbers showing more people are waking up. They're scared of the fact that the #1 Yahoo search in the last decade is basically 9/11 conspiracies. They're scared of this conspiracy culture taking over. That's really just people becoming informed. The system knows they're losing control.
And they are on the run, and we're going to run them right off the end of the pier.
How do you see that unfolding, though? This is going to be a tough road.
Yeah, it's always a tough road. and that's when the tough get going. And we just got to keep on getting the message out of what these people are doing. It's just dissemination and info war of the truth, and that's all we need. And, you know, it'll make sense to people who have never thought about things in the way that we're explaining them now, and giving them the proof as to who's doing what to whom. And we'll get there. And they know that. And they're terrified because they know this time they're going down with the ship.
They reached for the world, but in the process began their destruction. We're going to break, but I want to start getting into this now. How big of a deal is it for freedom that Iceland had a referendum last weekend, 93% voting, saying we will not pay privately for these debts that the banks came in and fraudulently set up?